In 1980, Evel Knievel told the world he was finished because his body was a ledger of wreckage. 433 broken bones, repeated concussions, a frame that creaked just to mount the saddle. Fans nodded. How could anyone keep leaping after that much damage? But the account in this video slips a second card onto the table. The end didn't come only from fractures and scar tissue. It came after a phone rang, a short call, a few sentences, and the man who had flown over walls of cars and bus roofs decided he wasn't going to point a front wheel at a ramp ever again. The program doesn't name the caller. It doesn't quote the exact words. Instead, it positions the call like a fuse, small, fast, and final, then pulls back to show the powder Evel Knievel had stacked around himself by the late 1970s. That context matters. By then, the bravado and stars and stripes myth sat on a darker foundation. The very public, very brutal 1977 parking lot assault on promoter Shelley Saltman with an aluminum bat, after Saltman's tell-all painted Knievel as drunk, pill-dependent, and vicious. The sponsors that evaporated overnight: Harley-Davidson, Ideal Toys, along with millions in licensing. The jail time and probation. The giant civil judgment he never paid, buried instead under bankruptcy filings. The legend could still draw a crowd, but the business and legal weather had turned against him. Layer onto that the federal attention the video describes. Mid-70s FBI interest in potential racketeering. Allegations that associates beat people while Knievel made threats by phone and then claimed distance afterward. Nothing made it to a courtroom conviction, but the paper trail suggests a climate where violence, real or implied, moved alongside the show. That is the backdrop to the call. For a man who had phoned others with warnings, the video hints a warning may have come back to him. Whether it was a voice from law enforcement, a burned business partner, a bettor with money on the line, or someone from the shadowy edges that thrived around big, risky spectacles, the message landed where broken bones had not. It reached his fear. Fear, of course, wasn't supposed to be part of the Knievel brand. He had already survived the 1967 Caesars Palace catastrophe, pelvis and legs shattered, ankles broken, a concussion captured perfectly on film. He had declared never again after flattening himself at Wembley in 1975, then broken his own vow with the record Kings Island bus jump months later. He had even tried to vault a canyon with a temperamental steam rocket, watched the chute open at liftoff, and still banked millions off the failure. He could sell crashes because he walked away from them, on tape, on 2 feet, mic in hand. But by the end of the decade, the pattern bent. The 1976 Shark Tank rehearsal didn't just injure him, debris hit a cameraman and cost the man an eye. For the first time, someone else paid the price. The crowds were thinning. The last attempts, Seattle's 11 cars, that quiet Puerto Rico engagement, felt less like triumphs and more like a man visiting his own museum. So when the phone rang, it met a Knievel who was no longer simply the daredevil who came in walking, went out walking. It met someone carrying legal liabilities, federal scrutiny, estranged relationships, and a body that could no longer guarantee recovery. The call's brevity is part of its punch in this telling. Only minutes, the narrator says, and it shut the door that 8 months in a body cast never could. We don't get the identity, we get effect. After that conversation, the ramp was over. No press conference bravado. No one last jump bargaining. Just a decision that stuck. The reveal functions like a key to his contradictions. A man who told school kids to stay clean while swallowing painkillers, who thrilled stadiums and terrorized people in parking lots, who turned failure into revenue and then watched sponsors flee after one act of frontier justice. Bones had always mended enough for the next flight. Reputation, contracts, and unseen pressures don't heal as predictably. The video doesn't pretend to solve the mystery of the caller. It uses the mystery to explain a certainty. Knievel finally found a force he wouldn't jump, a threat he wouldn't test. And that is how the era of red, white, and blue flight ended, not only with a broken body, but with a voice on the line that convinced the most famous risk-taker in America that the next risk wasn't worth taking. Before the red, white, and blue leathers, there was a boy named Robert Craig Knievel trying to outrun an empty house. He was born October 17, 1938, in Butte, Montana, a mining town where men disappeared underground at dawn and sometimes didn't come back at dusk. His father was 21, already chasing other women. His mother was 17, already learning how disappointment ages a face. Within 2 years, the family shattered. In 1940, both parents were gone. His mother vanished entirely, and his father dumped Robert and his infant brother, Nick, born 1939, at the doorstep of his own parents and sped off to Reno to race cars. One engine rev, and the boys were wards of 2 people who weren't ready for a second round of parenting. Their grandfather, Ignatius, wrestled with mental illness and could fall into months-long silences that turned the house cavern quiet. Their grandmother, Emma, pushed herself to fill the gaps, but was in her late 40s and overwhelmed. In that thin space between love and capacity, the boys learned to be loud. Robert grew feral in a way only abandoned children understand. Skipping classes, stealing whatever flashed, testing every fence just to prove there was one. Butte's streets gave him 2 educations at once: how danger works and how attention feels. At 8 years old, he met the feeling that would set his compass forever. Joey Chitwood's auto daredevils rolled into Butte with cars that rode 2 wheels, jumped ramps, and flipped in rehearsed chaos. Robert sat in the stands and watched a crowd gasp in unison. The moment when breath leaves 10,000 mouths at the same time. He saw a paycheck attached to audacity and learned you could make a living by convincing people you might die. He walked out of that show with a hunger that school books couldn't touch. By his early teens, he was already taking grown men's jobs. He dove into the copper mines that defined Butte, where each shift was a wager against cave-ins and gas. He guided hunting trips into rough Montana country, reading Wind and Slope and Animal Sign the way other kids read comic strips. His grandfather, on clearer days, had taught him how to move through the wilderness. When the illness returned, Robert moved through it alone. Then came the blow that truly unmoored him. In 1953, Emma died, the one steady hand in a home of thin resources and thinner patience. Ignatius, sinking deeper into his own illness, couldn't keep the family afloat. With the only anchor cut loose, 16-year-old Robert drifted hard. He fought more, stole more, and treated the law as a rumor. Teachers had noticed the raw materials. He was agile, fast, a natural at track and hockey, and even ski jumping. But the classroom couldn't compete with the adrenal clarity of risk. Around 1954, he walked out of high school and didn't look back. That exit wasn't just a teenager's tantrum. It was a philosophy forming. Rules felt like cages built by people who hadn't lived underground or stared down a skittish horse on black ice. He valued movement over permission, results over approval, and the straightest line between boredom and spectacle. He wasn't blind to cost. Butte taught that price is always due, but he believed the bill would come later, and that he'd be fast enough to dodge it when it did. So the boy who'd been left at a doorstep started leaving his own home, school, and anything else that tried to domesticate him. The town's dangers had given him calluses and a code. The Daredevil show had given him a blueprint. Before there was Evel, there was Robert, a kid who learned early that applause can fill a quiet house, that risk can feel like family, and that the fastest cure for being powerless is to do something everyone else is certain you can't. The boy who fled rules for adrenaline did something surprising in 1956. He signed up to live inside the strictest rulebook he could find. The U.S. Army, specifically training with the 101st Airborne, handed Robert Craig Knievel a uniform, a checklist, and a parachute. What he learned there didn't erase the Butte instincts. It sharpened them. 30-plus successful jumps taught him how to measure wind in his bones, how to trust hardware while expecting failure, how to keep breathing when the ground rushes up like a fist. He even funneled that energy into the Army's track team as a pole vaulter, another sport where you sprint at a barrier, hurl yourself over it, and hope technique outruns gravity. But the part of him that bristled at orders never left. He clashed with officers, tested boundaries, and discovered that he could follow procedures flawlessly right up to the instant they contradicted his gut. After roughly a year, he exited with an honorable discharge. Skills intact, discipline acquired, defiance unbroken. That mixture, precision drilled into a rule breaker, was volatile, and civilian life lit the fuse quickly. Fresh out of the service, he wound up in the kind of trouble that had followed him since boyhood. A wild motorcycle chase, flashing lights, the metallic echo of a cell door. It was in that boring fluorescent nowhere, the county jail, that an accident of language christened one of the most famous stage names in America. During roll call, a guard moved down the corridor reading out names. In the next cell sat a petty offender named William Knievel, notorious enough that cops had nicknamed him Awful Knuffle. The guard, called Knievel, smirked at the rhyme, looked over at Robert, and, as if middle school wordplay were a court decree, said, "Then you must be Evel Knievel." The moment could have been nothing, a joke that dies as the keys jingle away. But Robert understood the power of a label. Butte had taught him that a reputation could walk into a room 10 minutes before you did. He took the jab, pocketed it, and turned it until it gleamed. He tweaked the spelling, evil, softened to Evel, to carve off the satanic edge without dulling the dare. In that tiny edit lay an entire marketing philosophy. Menace without malice. Danger without outright villainy. Evel would be the man who risked himself in front of you, not the man who wished harm on you. From there, the pieces began to click. The Army had gifted him air sense, ritual, and the calm to checklist a machine when fear wants to skip steps. The arrest handed him a brand that sounded like a drum roll. Together they made a blueprint. Dress the risk in show business, sell the show with a name no one forgets, and trust that audiences will pay to watch a human being try to outjump disaster. Long before he stitched stars and stripes onto leather, this was the real costume change. A kid abandoned in Butte put on a word and found that it fit. The transcript's through line is clear. The military couldn't tame him, but it taught him how to aim. The streets couldn't keep him, but they named him. By the time he walked out of that jail, Robert was a legal reality, and Evel was an idea ready to cash checks. Next came the hustle, small bore grifts, staged wrecks, and the first rickety ramps in parking lots that would turn a nickname into a business and a dare into a career. The transcript doesn't clean up the origin story, it leaves the grime on Evel's knuckles. In the early 60s, before posters and pay-per-view hype, the money came in crooked lines. The video says he toggled between real wrecks and staged ones, learning that a mangled frame could be as profitable as a checkered flag, especially if an insurance adjuster was squinting at the paperwork. After breaking a collarbone in a legitimate race, he briefly sold policies himself, circa 62, and that proximity taught him which claim descriptions slid smoothly through a company's gears and which ones ground into suspicion. Some spills were genuine. Others, the video claims, were arranged. Either way, he discovered an equation that felt like destiny. Risk plus narrative equals cash. That hustle wasn't his only revenue stream. The piece folds in arrests, hubcaps, motorcycles, even rumors of safe-cracking. Because Knievel didn't mind converting myth into autobiography if it served the persona. He brandished the misdeeds as a resume item. Proof he was hard, untamable, not some chorus boy in a leather jacket. He only throttled back, the narrator says, when a partner caught a bullet. Mortality punctured the con, and he began to wonder if there wasn't a cleaner way to sell the same danger. The pivot came with a stage small enough to fit on a pickup bed. In 1965, he rolled out the first version of what would become a touring act. No wind tunnel, no engineers, just nerve, a ramp, and a Honda 250. The set piece was pure circus fever dream, a crate of rattlesnakes flanked by 2 live mountain lions, and Knievel arcing a motorcycle over the whole, teeth and scales glinting under bar lights. He landed ugly, twisted an ankle, but the room roared. There was his second equation. Audiences don't demand perfection. They demand a story they can't quite believe. He christened the outfit Evel Knievel and his motorcycle daredevils, then hauled it to any Montana dive that would clear a parking lot and wire a speaker to a mic. From those scruffy lots came a graduate course in spectacle. He learned to write his own carnival barker patter, thanking the owner, tipping the band, promising a show no one would forget. He figured out how to fletch a crowd with anticipation. The slow walk to the bike, the throttle blip, the helmet pause at the top of the ramp. He began to read terrain with the same battlefield calm the Army had drilled into him, counting run-up paces, eyeing wind flags on pickup antennas, adjusting ramp angle by feel. The math was primitive but real. Weight, speed, gap, landing pitch. Then came the cash discipline. Pass the hat, split the gate, square up the sheriff who'd prefer not to hear tires squeal at 11 p.m. And the crashes, always the crashes, taught him how publicity actually propagates. On January 23, 1966, in Moses Lake, Washington, he tried to clear 2 pickups and didn't. The wreck broke ribs and an arm. It also sold more tickets than a clean jump would have. That was the third equation he'd been groping toward since Joey Chitwood's show in Butte. Failure, if cinematic, is marketable. By year's end, he moved to Moses Lake, tuned customers' bikes by day, and booked bigger stunts by night, leveraging the misfire into momentum. He wasn't a racer anymore. He was an act. What changed wasn't only scale, but self-conception. The hustler who had faked accidents to squeeze insurers now designed real ones, calculated risks dressed as miracles, so he could get paid in daylight. He brought the con into the open and called it entertainment, aligning risk with applause instead of affidavits. The transcript doesn't ask us to excuse the past. It shows how the past rehearsed the future. The same instincts, find the angle, sell the story, cash the check, moved from police blotters to show posters. Crowds didn't care if he'd once bought a motorcycle with suspicious money. They cared whether he'd fly long enough to blur. In that sense, the shady chapter wasn't a detour. It was the blueprint, teaching him that danger plus narration equals profit, and that nothing narrates like a man who just stood up from asphalt, limping, grinning, and promising the next jump will be bigger. By the mid-60s, Knievel had already discovered that spectacle sells, but 1967 taught him something harsher. Catastrophe sells better. Broke, unknown, and running out of patience, he manufactured his first true big break with a telephone and nerve. He invented Evel Knievel Enterprises, posed as his own handlers, and, using a carousel of voices, convinced Caesar's Palace that ABC, Sports, and Sports Illustrated were backing a fountain jump. The casino bit. On New Year's Eve, after losing his last 100 at the blackjack table and bracing himself with a quick drink, he aimed at 141 feet of marble myth. The takeoff looked clean. The landing became legend. He pinwheeled into the asphalt, pelvis and legs shattered, ankles broken, brain rattled. He spent 29 days in the hospital. His wife would later insist he wasn't comatose the whole time, but the coma rumor did him a strange favor. It deepened the aura. Actor John Derek had filmed the attempt, and his wife, Linda Evans, captured the carnage. ABC, which had refused to air the stunt live, bought the footage and ran it repeatedly. America learned his name not because he landed safely, but because he almost died trying. He leaned into the paradox. In 1968 at Scottsdale, he arranged 15 Ford Mustangs into a long, bright stripe of American optimism, and then cleared them, only to explode his right leg and foot on touchdown. Another hospital, another headline. The arithmetic was becoming inescapable. Bigger gaps meant bigger crashes. Bigger crashes meant bigger crowds next time. Yet it wasn't all wreckage. On February 18, 1973, in the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, he stacked spectacle into a colossus. 51 crushed cars arranged like a rusted staircase, an 18-car flight path built over them, and a 300-pound Harley-Davidson XR750 beneath the stars and stripes suit. He flew, he stuck the landing, the stadium went momentarily silent, then detonated in noise. He grabbed the microphone and accused the audience, half teasing, half challenging, of coming to watch him die. That jump stood unbroken for 35 years. The very bike later took a place in the Smithsonian, as if American risk itself needed a display case. Then came Wembley, May 26, 1975. 90,000 in the seats, 13 London buses on the ground, and a private confession to a friend that the math didn't add up. He rolled anyway. Midair told the truth. He was short. The crash was gruesome. Pelvis, hand, and he waved off the stretcher, rallied to the mic, and told the crowd they were the last to see him jump. He walked out of the stadium under his own power, a living poster for defiance. The vow lasted 5 months. On October 25, 1970, at Kings Island in Ohio, he stared down 14 Greyhound buses and a live ABC audience. The run-up was perfect, the arc long, the landing brutal, so hard it snapped the motorcycle's frame, but he rode it out on the roof of the final bus. 133 feet, a new record that would hold until '99. The deal, the video notes, was tango with Evel all the way. To get his signature, the production team had to track him 2,000 miles to Butte and wait while he finished a round of golf. The chase was part of the show. Together, those peaks and plummets wrote the Evel formula in indelible ink. The public didn't just buy tickets to see a man defy gravity. They came to witness a person gamble with inevitability and then stand up, bloodied, grinning, talking. Clean landings polished the brand. Rex welded it into folklore. Caesars gave him a national stage. Scottsdale proved pain could be monetized. LA crowned him with a museum piece. Wembley minted the martyr's vow. Kings Island resurrected the promise breaker who somehow always returned bigger. Each chapter hardened the paradox at the heart of the persona. America's most famous survivor kept becoming more famous by almost not surviving. When the Park Service shut the door on the Grand Canyon, Evel didn't lower his sights. He redrew the map. Idaho would be his new mythology. He leased 300 acres outside Twin Falls, scrub and rimrock staring at the wind-cut mouth of the Snake River Canyon, and told the world he would jump it. Not on a Harley, on a rocket. The machine had a name with comic book bravado, SkyCycle X2, and an engineer with real credentials, Robert Truax. The specs read like a dare to gravity, steam power, thrust that was supposed to punch him toward 394 miles per hour in 5 seconds, and a ballistic arc that would clear roughly 1,600 feet of empty air. It wasn't an elegant airplane. It was a pressure cooker strapped to a dream. From the start, the Enterprise wore both promise and bad omens. A test flight cratered, and the rebuild tried to tame the beast by making it more like a plane, though no one could reasonably call SkyCycle a plane. While Truax reworked valves and fins, Evel did what he understood best. He sold it. Posters, interviews, a drumbeat of superlatives. He even turned the launch into a box office event, selling tickets so people could watch live in movie theaters. The canyon rim became a carnival ground. Down below, the river curled like a dare. September 8, 1974. The schedule said 3:36 p.m., and for once the clock obeyed. Evel, wrapped in stars and stripes, climbed into a capsule that looked more torpedo than cockpit. Harness buckled, helmet secured. A countdown that pressed every syllable into the wind. Then fire, lurch, acceleration, and the instant everything went sideways. The parachute deployed at liftoff. Not seconds later. Right then. A blossom of drag where there should have been clean thrust. The canopy yanking the craft backward even as the motor shoved forward. The sky cycle actually crossed the canyon's mouth. Proof the basic math wasn't pure fantasy, but the wind caught the open chute and bullied the vehicle back toward the launch side. Spectators on the rim lost him to the edge and then found him again as gravity took over. The rocket fell into the canyon and slammed into the rocks on the same side it started from. A humiliating geometry lesson played in real time. Later, Evel admitted the true razor's edge. Had the capsule splashed into the river, a harness malfunction that trapped him would likely have drowned him before rescuers could cut him free. He had, in a perverse way, been lucky to lose to stone instead of water. And yet, by the ledger that had followed him since Caesar's palace, the failure succeeded. The launch sold like a prize fight. Theater receipts and global attention pushed the take to an astonishing $6 million, more than many clean victories earn. The stunt proved the business model he'd been refining since the Moses Lake wreck. Sell the attempt as much as the outcome, wrap danger in a narrative, and let the crowd decide whether they saw tragedy or triumph. Idaho gave him both in a single arc. It also planted seeds for the fallout to come. The event's promoter, Shelley Saltman, was recording the behind-the-scenes churn, booze, pills, temper, while Evel grinned for cameras and promised a clean, heroic line from ramp to horizon. Those notebooks would become a book. That book would light the fuse on the parking lot ambush with an aluminum bat. The bat would cost sponsors and summon courts. But on launch day, none of that was visible to the paying audience. What they saw was a man who'd been told no by the Grand Canyon and replied with an improvised Air Force, a rented patch of earth, and a rocket that made him a speck against the Idaho sky. Snake River Canyon distilled the Evel paradox into a single afternoon. The technology was wobbly. The choreography was perfect. The flight failed. The legend grew. He didn't clear the canyon in any clean aerodynamic sense, but he cleared something else, the boundary between bike stuntman and global spectacle. From then on, even his defeats arrived as events with ticket stubs attached. Proof that in the Evel economy, gravity could win, and the cash register could ring at the same time. The story pivots here from ramps and roar to something colder. The way Evel Knievel handled opposition when the cameras weren't rolling. Shelley Saltman had been hired to hype the Snake River Canyon spectacle. Book the interviews, grease the skids, keep the carnival moving. While he did that, he also kept notes. Long nights and long pours. Painkillers stacked like poker chips. A temper that could turn an ordinary disagreement into a hostage situation. In 1977, those notes hardened into a book. Evel Knievel on tour. And the portrait it painted wasn't the school assembly hero who told kids to pray and stay clean. It was a man running on pills, booze, bile, and control. The book landed like a thrown wrench in a drive chain. Knievel answered the way a man answers when he thinks fear is faster than court. September 21, 1977, midday California sun. The parking lot at 20th Century Fox. Saltman walking with an aluminum briefcase. Evel stepping out with an aluminum bat. "I'm going to kill you," he said, according to the account, as an associate pinned Saltman's arms. The swings weren't wild, they were chosen. Deliberate arcs meant to break the shield of a forearm and then break the rest. Bone gave way. Saltman crumpled.